What's going on, everybody? The No Huddle Show. I'm Eliot Shorr-Parks. We are back with another episode with me and Zack Rosenblatt, and we are here 1 week until training camp. And on this episode, we talked about a lot. I mean, football is finally about to be back. There's a lot to talk about. We went over our top 10, I think it actually turned out to be 12, storylines for training camp, what we think are going to be the most talked about subjects, projecting some stuff that in 3 weeks we'll be talking about on the podcast. Went over, key guys like Alshon, what we expect from Wentz, even Nate Sudfeld, backup offensive line. So we really took a deep dive into this roster as training camp approaches. So that's definitely some good stuff. I'm excited to be talking football again. But before we get into the podcast, I just wanted to remind you guys, now that we're back in football mode, we really appreciate if you would subscribe. So we're on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and Spreaker. So you can catch us on all those. We're on YouTube. We always read those YouTube comments. So we appreciate everyone that does that. Toss us a thumbs up there if you don't mind, but also subscribe. And once you do subscribe, leave those 5-star reviews. We love 5-star reviews. Go in there. We will answer every question you leave this season in a comment. So go in there, leave a question, and we'll talk about it on the podcast. I love interacting with Eagles fans. Zack does too. So please, guys, get in there and leave a comment. So training camp, 1 week away. The No Huddle Show is back. Here we go. What's going on, everybody? The new episode of the No Huddle Show. Training camp, 1 week away, which is pretty hard to believe. I was looking at highlights on Twitter of the Super Bowl this morning, and it's just, first of all, it's crazy that the further we get away from that game, the more unbelievable what we saw in that game was. But second, it's just crazy to think that it feels like just yesterday I was in Minnesota. And now, Zack, you're getting ready for your first training camp as an Eagles beat reporter, which starts 1 week. We're recording this on a Thursday, July 19th, 1 week from today.
It's wild. I'm pumped, man. I as a fan a while back, I went to when it was at Lehigh. I drove out to Lehigh with my brother, and made a wrong turn at some point. So added 30 minutes onto our trip.
Nice.
And I just remember going and just being so, even just as a fan, the day the fans get to go, the excitement around training camp. I don't think there's anything like it in any other sports in terms of preseasons.
And I mean, the tickets for the open training camp practices went on sale, quote unquote, even though you didn't have to pay. And it seems like they sold out, and I don't think
pretty
they're going to fill.
Quickly too.
Yeah, so in the years past, they haven't filled the whole stadium. I don't even know if they would, but those are obviously going to be crazy. It'll be the first chance for the general public to see this team since they won the Super Bowl. And yeah, I mean, the thing about training camp, I covered it for a few years at Lehigh as an intern, and then, obviously I've been full-time with NJ.com for a while doing it. But I would say, the cool thing about training camp compared to OTA practices and all that is that even though they're not open to fans, there's always around 200 fans in there, whether it's season ticket holders, businesses.
Family.
Yeah, just things like that. So there's, you'll see, there's always still a mood going on. Fans cheer. There's never any booing, obviously, but yeah, it's cool. It's exciting to get back. I'm excited to track quarterback stats again. I'm excited to do daily
You're
observations.
famous for that. That's your thing.
Exactly. Yeah, I'm excited for daily observations. I'm excited for just the ebb and flow of camp. Honestly, it's my favorite time of the year. I like it better than the draft, the off season. I mean, covering the Super Bowl is pretty cool, but that's not something that happens regularly around here. I just think the excitement of training camp, not knowing what's going to happen, who's going to make the team, doing my 53-man roster predictions, putting people's stock up and down. I just think it's definitely my favorite time of the year. And on that note, what makes it my favorite time of the year is all the storylines, all the craziness that kind of happens week in and week out. So with the training camp 1 week away, we are going to be talking today about storylines and just saying, what we think the biggest storylines are going to be, saying what they are now, maybe projecting a little too for a few of them, and just looking ahead to what's going to be, really a next crazy month with multiple preseason games, training camp practices, and all that. So here's how we did this. Me, Zack, and I both wrote down 10 topics. We're going to go back and forth because we're probably going to double up a little. We're going to go over the 10 biggest storylines either we think is going to happen in training camp or we know will be a big storyline. So, Zack, you can go first, and I have a pretty good idea of where you're going to go with this one.
Yeah, I'll keep it obvious for the story, and that's the health of Carson Wentz.
Yeah.
I mean, we talked, I think, every episode during the spring about how great he looked, how shocked we were that he was, as involved as he was during the spring. If it was December and you had asked us, like, is he going to even participate in the spring? I'm guessing you would have said no, probably, right?
Yeah, for sure. Now I think, like, what type of odds would I have to give you to bet that on the first practice of the first day of training camp he does 11 on 11?
Ooh, I don't know. That's a good question. Oh man, that's tough. I don't know if I don't think he's going to, but I think there's definitely a chance.
I think there's a pretty good chance. I think Wentz is a guy that is very aware of the optics of this situation. I know we said we didn't want to talk about the ESPYs, but I thought it was a little interesting that he wasn't at the ESPYs a few nights ago with the team.
Yeah, and all the other guys were, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of the other guys were. Now, he did just get married, so I don't know if he's, like,
True.
On his honeymoon, which could be the case. But, I don't know. I thought it was just a little weird he's not there. He's the franchise quarterback, and I get he didn't play in the game. But I think Wentz is very aware he wants people to still realize he's the guy on this team. And I think that showed during OTAs when he kind of did a ton more than we thought, had his helmet on, really taking part in everything. And I think it would mean something to Wentz to be out there on the first day, first practice, 11 on 11s. Now, maybe he doesn't take all the snaps or anything like that, but I think there's, maybe close to a 50% chance that he's out there the day one ready to go taking those 11 on 11s. But what are some things you're going to look for in terms of his progress? And, like, at what point do you think fans will be able to feel even more comfortable that he's going to play? Or at what point do you think it'll be time to maybe start getting realistic with the fact he might not play in week one?
It's an interesting question because, he's obviously not going to get hit during training camp. So I think the biggest question, I think he looked great. I think you've said this before. If, like, he didn't have a knee brace on, you wouldn't even know that he had a knee injury based on the way he was moving. So for me, it's not. I don't even know if necessarily. I mean, getting through healthy and, like, not re-injuring or suffering any new injuries is the main thing. But I don't know, until we actually see him take hits and be in game action. I don't know if there's really much that I'm looking for necessarily in terms of him being ready for week one. Because as of right now, I think he's going to be ready for week one. We just don't know how he'll be once people start tackling him and he gets weight put on that leg. And, defensive players are going to target his knee because they know that it's bad. So
right.
I think that really until he plays, like, it's hard to really answer that, I think.
So I was thinking yesterday, like, how crazy it would be if Foles started week one. Obviously, everyone wants the players to be 100% healthy. You don't ever want a player to deal with an injury. So clearly, I think we both hope Wentz is ready for week one just because you want to see everybody healthy for week one. I hope Timmy Jernigan's ready for week one. But just the narrative and the storyline, it's going to be a zoo that night either way. Like, Super Bowl banner, first game of the NFL season, prime time versus a playoff opponent. It's going to be a wild scene. And it'll be another level of wild if Wentz is playing. But if, like, Foles plays and he has, 3 touchdowns in the first half, like, then things get interesting. So that leads me to the one I'll pick next as what's going to be one of the top storylines. And that's going to be, will Foles be happy as a backup? I think in a lot of ways this is going to be a narrative whether the Eagles wanted to or not, because I can tell you that there's going to be national guys there every week, every day, basically, trying to talk to Foles, asking him about this. He's probably answered this question 800 times at this point. He's going to answer it 800 more times over the next 5 weeks. If he has a really good day at practice, they'll just be that type of stuff, knowing that he's eventually heading to a backup. And I think I didn't read his book yet, but from some of the excerpts I've seen of Foles' book, there was a few interesting lines in there where I'm not saying he's, like, going to be upset this year, but just things like, seeing other quarterbacks get a deal, he noticed that, and then he ended up getting a new contract. He talked about, the ability as a free agent next year to get to pick and choose where he wants to go as opposed to being traded. So I do think Foles is going to be happy, but I do think there will always be a little bit of that underlying, like, Wentz throws a bad pass, what's going on with Foles, like that type of thing.
Yeah, I think it'll be more like, certainly I think he might get frustrated or, waiting for, like, his opportunity this year, but I don't think he's going to make a fuss out of it because I don't think that's in his personality. I think more than anything it would become a distraction if, like you said, he comes out, has a great game, then Carson Wentz comes in week 2, maybe struggles the first couple weeks getting back into the groove of things, and then maybe you start hearing the outside questioning, like, wait, should we be thinking about a quarterback controversy? Should Nick Foles be the quarterback? Like, that'll happen if that's, like, the way it plays out. And I think that would be the distraction more than – I think Nick Foles' presence is almost a distraction more than, like, Nick Foles himself.
Agreed. And then there's the whole thing of, God forbid, in second week of training camp, we hear that, I'm trying to think of a team, like Kirk Cousins goes down with a
yeah.
I mean, there's going to be that type of thing where
Sam Bradford type of deal.
Right. Every time a quarterback goes down, there's going to be that speculation whether it makes sense for Foles to go there as a trade partner. So Foles is without question going to be one of the biggest storylines. I'm writing a story this week on NJ.com. The biggest, like, who has the most juice in Philly sports? And I think there's an argument to be made that Wentz and Foles are number 1 and 2 in the entire city in terms of the most popular athletes. And I think you can make the argument right now it's Foles, just because he's been more in the public eye. He won the Super Bowl. He's been on all the talk shows. You know, he was at the ESPYs. And I think obviously everyone recognizes Wentz is still the guy, but we're being naive, and I think Wentz is being naive if he doesn't realize that there is the possibility of Foles continuing to win over this city.
And well, I think that goes into what you said earlier about Wentz understanding and caring about the narrative kind of thing. So I think we'll see a lot of how much Wentz is thinking about that based on how quickly he pushes himself to get back out there.
Right. No, I agree. All right, you are up for the next pick.
This is more of like a training camp storyline than a full-on season one, but I just think the health of like a large chunk of their main players is going to be something to keep an eye on. Because I can even go through off the top of my head some of the guys. You know, Carson Wentz. You got Alshon Jeffrey dealing with off-season shoulder surgery. Brandon Graham ankle. Tim Jernigan might be out for the first 6 weeks if they put him on the PUP list. Who am I missing? I feel like there's somebody else. Jordan Hicks is still recovering.
Right.
Jason Peters. We're not sure how Jason Peters. I mean, he was limited and he participated in the spring, but we don't know how his knee's feeling. And he's a little older. I mean, Darren Sproles is coming off a couple major injuries. Like there's a lot of guys that we haven't really seen that much of yet, and they had pretty serious injuries. Like Alshon Jeffrey played with a shoulder injury the entire season, so he's going to pay the consequences of that probably right now. So I'm just curious to see how much these guys participate for the ones that are sitting out, if they'll be ready for week one, how long they sit out, if they practice leading up to week one. Like I think that's going to be an important thing to keep an eye on, because if these guys come back too soon and they hurt themselves, then the Eagles are going to be hurt way earlier in the season than they need to be.
So some thoughts on the injured guys. First, I think it's kind of become like a foregone conclusion that Jernigan's going to start on the PUP. And I was thinking about that this morning. I remember last year, different injuries, obviously, different levels of severity, but everyone thought Bo Allen was going to start on the PUP. And it was like, oh, he'll be on the PUP, he'll be on the PUP. And then 5 days out, it was like, oh, he's actually going to play in week one. So I think that although there is a chance that Jernigan does start on the PUP, I don't think that's a foregone conclusion. I think that's much more up in the air than people want to talk about. We're really just going off of a report on that. The Eagles haven't said anything in terms of a timeline.
We don't even know how he suffered it. It's something weird.
Right. And, with the NFL version of NBA players shooting in the gym, Jernigan has been on Instagram a lot, working out, like he looks like he's certainly being active. I think he's been running. So, I'm not saying that means much of anything, but it certainly does seem like he's working hard in his rehab and he is progressing. So I in terms of Jernigan, I wouldn't count him out for week one. Peters, I think, does play in week one. I think Hicks plays in week one. Sproles obviously plays in week one.
Yeah. Jeffrey's a question mark, I think, though.
I do think Jeffrey's a question mark.
I think he's going to play, but I think you can at least say, like, I could see him not playing.
I go back and forth because as people have tweeted me roughly 800 times over the past 24 hours, he did play last season with a torn rotator cuff. So he obviously knows how to play through this injury. I guess it's a little different now that he had the surgery. I think he does play in week one. I don't think he plays at all in training camp or the preseason games. Last year he barely played. Obviously he had, I guess in retrospect, just suffered the torn rotator cuff. But just from talking from people that were in Chicago, he doesn't normally partake in a ton of training camp anyway. So I think he will play in week one. Chris Maragos, I think of all the injured guys, even though he's probably the least important, is kind of, in some ways, personally for him, the most important in his recovery because he could not have a roster spot.
If he wants to make the team,
right.
Totally.
So it'll be interesting to see when he starts to play.
I mean, not as sorry to cut you off, but not as big of a deal. But Josh Adams also is fighting for a roster spot, and he hasn't even played yet.
Yeah, so I think he will be ready for the start of training camp. So that'll be a good sign for him to kind of get out there and start to make an impression on the coaches. Although honestly, I think the Eagles would be perfectly okay if he didn't play at all and he just rode IR all year.
Yeah.
Because they don't really need him at running back. But Maragos is a guy that if he doesn't. Like, if he's not playing by the second preseason game, then I think it could be one of two things. One is he's so secure in his roster spot he doesn't feel the need to push it. Or two, he is actually legitimately still recovering, at which point the Eagles have to strongly consider, again, a guy like Corey Graham, bringing in somebody to kind of take his spot on the roster. Not so much as a safety, more as a special teams guy. All right. The next one I had in terms of a story camp training line, Ronald Darby trade.
You just said story camp training line, by the way.
I did. Nice. All right. I'm already in getting ready for regular season mode. Training camp storyline is just 3 words: Ronald Darby trade. I don't think this is something that we can completely rule out. I think Darby is set for a really good season if he stays. I think the coaches love Ronald Darby, but I think that, you look at the future. Jalen Mills is going to be here. Sidney Jones is going to be here. Rasul Douglas they view as an outside guy, which is kind of what they view Ronald Darby as. Obviously there's Devontae Bosby, how he's played very well. We'll see if that translates into the preseason. Avonte Maddox is a guy they just drafted. He's going to be here for the next 2 years at least.
It's a lot of cornerbacks.
It's a lot of corners, and Ronald Darby entering a contract year. Eagles don't normally let guys they like enter a contract year. I mean, they did it with Jernigan and Alshon, but they traded for those guys, or traded/signed those guys with 1 year left. So that's a little different than letting guys walk into their final year. So I think they'll always kind of be talk, especially if Bosby plays really well, if Sidney Jones looks good. I do think that there's going to be speculation about potentially trading Ronald Darby.
Yeah, no, I think that's been kind of a story, like in the background, a background storyline all offseason. I think a lot of it will come down to how confident they are in Sidney Jones coming off that injury, not any NFL experience, and if he can handle getting the snaps that he probably is going to need to get this season. So I think if they're confident that he can step in and become like a top 2 cornerback on this roster right away, then I think it makes sense to trade Darby and try and get either another player or more draft assets, because while he's on an expiring contract, he still is young and pretty talented, and they did just trade a 3rd-round pick and your boy last year for him. So right. I think there's some value. Cornerbacks still have value in the NFL. I know you're seeing in like free agency, safeties don't really have the same value. Linebackers' value has decreased, and running backs don't really have value. But I think corners in the pass first league, I think there's a team out there that would pay for him.
I think, though, that in order to trade him, it would have to be a really good offer, because I think the Eagles are perfectly content with kind of like going in this year with a stacked roster. I mean, they already have, I think it's something like 11 projected draft picks for next year when you take into account compensatory picks. So they're pretty stacked for the draft next year. They have two second-round picks. They have a first-round pick. I think it would probably take a first-round pick for them to deal Darby. I don't think they'll get offered a first-round pick for Darby.
No.
But, the more I think about it, like, they would rather be stacked, I think, than worry about the future. I mean, I think they take the challenge of repeating and getting back to the Super Bowl extremely seriously, and this roster is better with Ronald Darby on it. You can certainly make an argument of getting a 3rd-round pick for him now if he's going to walk next offseason. You can make that debate about every single player on the roster, but I do think that they would value keeping him.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to get traded, by the way. I just think that there could be value for him if they were to pursue that.
Yep. All right, next storyline.
Let's see. I'll go with it's kind of in the background right now, and you kind of touched on a guy going in the last season. I'll say Brandon Graham and his contract talks.
Ooh, I didn't have that one. Go ahead.
I don't know if it's necessarily going to be. I think his personality won't let it necessarily like be a distraction within the locker room, but I mean, he's an elite defensive end. You're seeing these defensive ends get huge contracts, and he's without question probably one of the 10 best pass rushers in the NFL. And I was just talking about how cornerbacks are valued. Defensive ends probably are maybe the most beyond quarterbacks in terms of like money. I think they might get the most in the NFL. Like it's kind of crazy that he's willingly going into his last season. I know he's recovering from injury, and that probably has something to do with why he hasn't even considered a holdout, even though I'm not sure he would anyway. But that's definitely going to be something to keep an eye on, and you wonder whether he has a great year because it's his contract year, or he struggles because he's thinking about it too much, or if that's something the Eagles are actually considering, or if he takes that personally that they're not even considering it. Like, I just think it's going to be something that's going to be in the background for a while.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is, because he is hurt, he doesn't really even have the option to hold out. Like, what's he not going to show up for rehab?
That was my thing. Yeah, it's hard to tell like if he would anyway,
right?
Because he's hurt.
And I kind of don't think he would. I think he's accepted the fact that it's not going to happen. One interesting note, since Brandon Graham's Instagram seems to be the biggest source of news this offseason, He is walking around without a boot on now, and he does
Wow.
seem to be, walking pretty comfortably. So it seems like he's progressing well. I still don't think we'll see him. Maybe like the last week of practice leading up to Atlanta. I would be surprised if he was a serious participant before that third preseason game. I don't think you need Graham to play in the preseason. You want Josh Sweat to play anyway, get these snaps, Derek Barnett, those type of guys. I think there's a decent chance he's ready for week one. But again, like if you're Brandon Graham, and I really do feel bad for Brandon Graham because he's such a nice guy that he's just played this the wrong way. I mean, he should have held out last year. That would have been his big chance. And now this offseason, he's not Super Bowl MVP, but he's one of the MVPs of the Super Bowl, and he's hurt, which like kills all of his leverage. So if you're Graham, I mean, like what's more important to you, playing 12 games at 100% or playing all 16 games and, rushing to get ready there for week one for the ring for the, the flag coming down and all that. So it's going to be interesting. I personally think he's going to want to play week one. He's going to want to feel that excitement of playing. He's going to want to be there with his guys. But I just wonder like what his agent will be telling him. I mean, the Eagles have to realize that if they're going to let him play this year on his final deal, he's going to have to, I mean, he just won the Super Bowl. This is his next big contract. It'll really be his only big contract in the NFL. I mean, his rookie deal was kind of big because there was no rookie wage scale yet. But the second contract he got was, if I remember correctly, like a 3-year deal as an outside linebacker with maybe $7 or $8 million guaranteed. So he never really has gotten that huge deal, 25, 30 million guaranteed, that he is the caliber of player that's worth getting that. It just seems like everything's kind of not broken his way contract-wise. So I think this is a big year for Graham to kind of prove he's healthy, prove he's that same player, and I think he has to put his own priorities first. So that's definitely a big storyline. I forgot about that one, but that is definitely a good one heading into next week, or the start of next week. All right, let me see. I want to pick a good one. I have a few here. All right, I've one. This is a bit of a projection for a storyline, but I think this is something that is going to happen. And I have slow start to preseason games causes panic. I think
like amongst fans, you mean?
Yeah, I think like because of the fact that
long season.
Well, I think all right for three main reasons. I think they're gonna start off slow in preseason. One, I think that because of all the injuries you just mentioned, some guys won't be playing, and B, the guys that will be in there that are kind of recovering from injuries are going to be just doing that, recovering from injuries, that type of thing. Two, they have like some new guys at key spots. Their nickel cornerbacks new. They have Mike Wallace as their number 2 receiver now. They're not going to have Alshon in there, so you're going to have like mix and matches there. Offensive line's always good, but I do think you could see, their backups at this point aren't ideal. I mean, you have Vaitai as a backup, and that's really your only dependable backup you have. So I think that could cause a little bit of struggle. But three, I just don't think that they're going to care that much about preseason. So I think, Doug's not going to be whipping out the Philly special in preseason. I mean, these are going to be very bland, vanilla games. And so I just think they're going to start out slow. And if Foles doesn't play well, because let's remember, Foles didn't really play well until the playoffs last year. He's not, he's a very hit or miss. If he doesn't play well, then you start to be like, okay, we need Wentz to play. We need Wentz to play. So I think when you add all that up, that there's going to be a slow start. And as we know about Philly fans, which is what I love about them, they live and die with every snap of every play, every game. So if they don't look good week one preseason, even if it's for one series for the offense, I think, the next day you're going to hear all the like, did they handle success well? We need Wentz to come back. Ben
McAdoo thinks they won't. So.
Exactly, right. And what Ben McAdoo thinks counts a ton. But, yeah, so I think that is going to be a storyline coming in preseason.
I agree. You mentioned Philly special, and it made me think, like, who's going to be the Trey Burton now that he's gone? If they run the Philly special again, who throws?
So Richard Rodgers apparently, I remember he said something at his press conference. Either maybe he used to play baseball or something about how he's pretty good throwing. I think if they run that play again, you see all the same players. I think Corey Clement's the guy that throws it. Maybe Ertz. Him and Foles,
interesting.
Him and Foles play catch before, not with a baseball, obviously. They warm up together before every game. Or as they did before Wentz got here, and then they did it again once Wentz went down. But so I think he would be the guy. I think they already have that good chemistry in terms of Ertz knows how to throw it the way Foles likes to catch it.
Yeah. I just thought that was an interesting because I saw Trey Burton all over the place at the ESPYs yesterday, and that got me thinking like.
Yeah, he had the Philly special in the coat.
Yeah, that was really cool.
All right, you are up in terms of the
I'm
next
up.
one.
All right, I'll say one that's not necessarily football related, but it's going to be a storyline, especially around this team. What's going to happen with the national anthem,
Ooh,
especially
another
with
one
guys.
I didn't have. So, all right, let's hear it.
These are more big picture ones, that's why.
Mm.
But I don't know. I think especially with Michael Bennett on the team, he hasn't come out and said he won't protest, though he has had the quotes where he's like, it's not necessarily about the act of protesting, it's about what you do in the community. But I mean, you still have guys like Malcolm Jenkins who hasn't, when he's been asked, hasn't really said what he's going to do yet. And I mean, Rodney McLeod, I think was one of the guys that raised his fist last year.
Yep.
So I mean, and Jenkins is the head of the Players Coalition, and we heard the other day that the Titans defensive lineman, Jurel, I don't know if that's how you say it, Jurel Casey.
Yep.
He said he's still going to be protesting during the anthem, and there's going to be implications this year, and we're going to see how the NFL reacts and how around the league how guys do it. And I think the Eagles are going to be always the one that's pointed to as kind of the face of it, even if they didn't necessarily kneel last year. And I'm just curious to see how they do it, how they react, how Jeffrey Lurie reacts, because he's been kind of down the middle when it comes to this stuff recently. So I just think maybe not in the preseason, but once the regular season starts, it's going to be a storyline.
Yeah, I mean, 2 points off of that. One is Jeffrey always does his kind of like State of the Union address during preseason, so we'll get answers from him on, is he going to fine players? Because remember, now the rule is the owners essentially decide if you fine the players.
And I know the Jets owner said he would pay for the fine.
Right, so that precedent is being set. I think Jeffrey is viewed publicly as one of the more liberal owners in the NFL, and privately I do think that is the case. So it'll be interesting to see how he answers that. But I will say in his press conferences, he's like very non-committal to everything. So I wouldn't be surprised if he like brushed that aside. And then if someone on the Eagles does something, we find out he didn't fine him or something like that. I would just be very surprised if Jeffrey ended up fining a player. But it'll be interesting to see what he says about that. But the other thing is, I kept focusing on week 1. And I think that is going to be the bigger stage, obviously. But during OTAs, I was on the sideline talking to someone that works for the Eagles, and they mentioned, there is the anthem in the preseason, too. So I don't know if the Eagles will kind of tip their hat, but in theory, I mean, and I'm not, going to say I'm going to tell these players how to feel, this is their thing. Malcolm knows so much more about the subject than I do. But in theory, I mean, the anthem before a preseason game shouldn't really mean any more or less than in the regular season. I get that it's a bigger stage, but remember, Kaepernick started sitting in the preseason. That's how that whole thing
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, although now that I said it, I'm only like 90% sure. But I am pretty sure it was in the preseason that he sat. And the funny thing about Kaepernick is he sat for one game. I don't think anybody noticed. And then the next game, someone like wrote a small column about it, and then it blew up. So it's just funny how like everyone thinks Kaepernick did this for all this attention and ended up getting that, but he kind of just did it on his own at first. So and I look forward to all the comments saying that all these things I got wrong about the Kaepernick story. But no, I think what they do in the first preseason game will be very interesting. And I think the Eagles embrace the fact that they're one of the teams that is forward, kind of at the front of this fight. So I don't think they're going to take their responsibility as the first team in week 1 lightly. So I'm very interested to see what they do. All right, so I don't have to cross any off my list because I didn't have that one. All right, how about this one? When will Howie Roseman make a trade? So Howie does more trades in the NFL than anybody else. I guess it was 2 years ago. Obviously, he traded Sam Bradford, but then also he had the DGB trade that kind of got everyone excited for a little bit. I'm trying to think if he made any trades during training camp last year.
Any minor ones, maybe?
Yeah, I'm sure he did. Off the top of my head, I can't.
I'll see if I can look it up.
He traded Jordan Matthews for Ronald Darby.
That's true. Yeah, because that happened during August, didn't it?
Yeah, it happened after the Green Bay game. So
yeah, I mean that's a pretty big one.
I always remember that.
Nobody saw that coming.
Yeah, I remember that because I had a really early flight out of Green Bay the morning after the game. I get home. I already have all my stuff written. I'm super tired. I ordered like a banging sandwich. I sit down. I'm ready to watch TV and eat. And then I get the text from the Eagles. They traded Jordan Matthews. And I'm like, well, so much for that. So I think there will be a moment this training camp where both of us will be in that situation where.
And they also traded John Dorenbos.
Yep, they did. And then there was that whole thing with the health debacle, which thankfully for him they discovered, but then pick. So
and they acquired Dexter McDougal. So he does like a bunch of minor ones usually.
Yeah. So there will be that again. So let's take a guess. When is that first trade made? And without maybe saying a player, like what position do the Eagles trade for first?
Okay, so are we predicting like a date and a position kind of thing?
Just kind of like after what preseason game?
Oh,
Not a
okay,
specific
gotcha.
date, but just at what point of training camp?
Uh, that's a good question. I think they make a trade for a defensive tackle,
All right.
and I think it happens halfway through the preseason.
Halfway through the preseason. I like defensive tackle as one because you have the Jernigan question mark and Haloti Nada is yet to practice.
Yeah, and then
We
all the other
didn't
guys
mention
are
him
kind of
with the
question marks
injuries.
too.
I
So
don't think. Yes, I think linebacker is a spot they could end up making a trade for, just because as of now, I mean, you have Corey Nelson and Nate Geary as your third guys, and then you obviously have the Hicks injury concern.
and Bradham suspended,
Oh yeah, that's right. Bradham suspended week 1.
so they might only have Nate Gary and and
I
like
mean, if
Jordan
God
Hicks
forbid
as the
Hicks isn't
linebackers,
ready,
yeah.
I mean, if Hicks isn't ready, who would it be? Nate Gary and Corey Nelson?
or Grugier Hill, I guess. I don't know.
I guess maybe Grugier Hill. I mean, Nate Gary was here all last year, but I don't know. You didn't play a ton, man. Even talking about this has me excited for this training camp to get going. But
When you're getting excited about talking about Grugier Hill, that's a good sign that you love this.
Exactly, that's how you know. But I think linebackers up there, and another one I think is offensive lineman, because like if you look at their top 5, assuming Peters is healthy,
Their bench is bad, yeah.
Yeah, they have Vaitai as a backup tackle, which is huge, obviously. But then outside of that, I mean, Sayamalu is a huge question mark / like basically sucks. Chance Warmack isn't very good, and like you have Taylor Hart, who I don't think they would keep 2 backup tackles. But if Taylor Hart,
Matt Pryor too, but yeah,
they have Matt Pryor, who I think, if I remember correctly, has been playing guard and tackle.
Yeah.
They have 2. So basically, do you keep 2 tackles with Taylor Hart? And if you do, I guess Taylor Hart takes his normal place on the inactive list every week, because you're not going to dress 2 guys that are only playing tackle. Like neither of them can play guard. So
it's a weird spot, and especially it's probably not a great sign when your number 1 backup center is your starting guard, because Wisniewski is the backup center. I don't know if that's a great situation to have.
No, it's not. So I think maybe interior offensive line could be a place you see them move a guy, like a veteran guy that's played, that they know what they're going to get, because they really just have a lot of question marks. And honestly, like calling them question marks might even be, putting it nicely. It's more like a ton of not very good players.
Like they're in trouble if one of their 5 starters gets injured, pretty much, unless it's a tackle, I guess.
They're in trouble if either of their guards or their center goes down. They're in huge trouble.
Or if Lane Johnson gets injured, because anytime he's hurt, they're bad. So.
Yeah, obviously, right. Yeah, I mean, he's top 3 most important player on the roster.
Yeah.
But although I will say, like, Lane Johnson is very good, don't get me wrong, and I'm not demeaning him in any way. But Vaitai, I think, is... I'll have to do my research. Yeah, and I mean, I'd have to go and look. But like, he might be the best backup tackle in the league. I mean, I'm sure people will tweet me some other guys, but he literally stepped in on a Super Bowl champion, played left tackle.
Well, generally speaking, backup offensive linemen aren't that good, because there's a reason why there's a backup. But the reason why he's a backup is because he was good when a guy was injured, and he's still on the roster. So I think it's a pretty unique situation.
Right. So he could start for probably a number of teams.
Yeah.
All right. That was all right. I just did one, right? I did the Howie trade thing.
Yeah, that was you.
All right, you're up.
All right. I'll say the transition from John DeFilippo and Frank Reich to Mike Rowe and Press Taylor.
Wow, I literally thought we would have the exact same 10, and I didn't have that one either.
See, I tried thinking a little outside of the box, to be fair, but yeah. See, mine are more like broad storylines. I have some like actual training camp ones, but I think this is going to be an important one, just because that they had such a finely tuned machine by the end of the season last year. Well, even throughout the season, but especially by the time Nick Foles became the quarterback. Like, I don't know many coaching staffs would have been able to so seamlessly transition from an MVP type guy to getting a quarterback ready who basically hadn't played all year. Like, I feel like people don't appreciate how difficult it is to do what they did for Nick Foles, considering he hadn't got snaps all year, and it's hard to go in cold turkey like that.
Right.
And they had him ready. So I think, these are 2 guys that, Mike Rowe's been around the coaching business for a long time, but he has, I don't know if he's like been the main play caller in quite a while. Oh, he has, Doug Peterson, I guess, is, but it's going to be interesting to see him taking on that role. And then Press Taylor is going to be pretty big, because he's a very young guy. He's never had a full-time coaching job, and now he's taken on, the most lucrative quarterback situation in the NFL. And it's going to be interesting to see if the offense transitions seamlessly to these 2 guys that are, compared to some coaches around the league, are relatively inexperienced.
So I think every point you made is a good one and a fair one. but I completely disagree. So I think that, like, yes, like I said, all those points you made are true, but I think that the Eagles, the way they handled it, and like because of the way the roster is set up, they're kind of like uniquely qualified. I mean, if any other team lost their offensive coordinator and their quarterback coach, I would say, all right, that's a question mark. And maybe I'm being a little naive, but I think if you take them one by one, I think that Mike Groh stepping in for Frank Reich will be a fairly seamless transition. I do think that, like, Frank Reich and Doug Peterson had a very close bond and a trust there. And I'm not saying that he already has that with Groh, because you have to develop that over time. But I do think that the moving Groh up was the right decision, because it kind of, as much as you sometimes need a new voice, I think in this situation you needed someone Doug trusted and knew the offense. Eagles don't really have to reinvent the wheel when it comes to their offense. So I think that could be a fairly seamless transition. And then quarterback coach, I mean, the Eagles have Wentz, who's basically the quarterback coach and is like basically co-offensive offensive coordinator. I mean, not to overstate what he does, but I mean, the guy is like a walking football textbook. And two, you have Foles, who is also, I mean, you know, played in the NFL a ton, veteran leader. So I think the Eagles are like, not to, like, DiFilippo did his job, but I don't think going forward, like, keeping him was as big of a priority as it would have been as it was having him the last 2 years. So
I mean, if it was a big priority to keep him, they would have just made him offensive coordinator in reality.
Right, exactly. So, and
no, you're right.
Yeah, so I do think that, like, it's one of those storylines where in week 6, if like the offense is struggling for whatever reason, and again, the other actually point is Doug is basically the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, no, you're right.
And he's still there. So, and a lot of what makes this offense special, I'm not diminishing the play designs, because obviously, you know, they do a great job with that. But what makes this offense so good is Doug's game, the way he calls the game on Sunday. And clearly preparation goes into that, which Frank Reich, DiFilippo, and other members of the offensive staff help with. But I think you still have like your top 2 guys in terms of what makes that offense special. And I think they're just uniquely qualified. But if in week 6, if they're struggling, maybe we'll look back at this and you'll end up being correct. I just you know, I think it would be interesting. All right. How many more do you have? I have 1, 2.
How many have we done?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've done 5 of mine, and you went first. So I think we might be done, but I have one more point I want to make about.
Okay.
Well, first of all, we didn't talk about nickel cornerback, maybe just because it's been exhausted as a topic all offseason.
Yeah, I don't know how much different we can add to it, but
right, but that is probably the biggest question mark on the roster, because it's basically a starting spot, and they lost.
And Patrick Robinson was so important last year, yeah.
Right. So, you know, I'm sure we'll talk about that a ton. Obviously, I think how they're going to start is, like, if the Eagles had to play a game tomorrow and everyone was healthy, I think Darby and Mills would be your starters on the outside. And when a third cornerback was in the game, which is a fair amount, Sidney Jones will take Mills' spot and Mills will move into the slot or the nickel. That's how I think they would do it. Do you agree? Or
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think it's gonna be a group effort in general, I think.
Right. All right. So here is the last thing I wanted to say. I think the most overrated storyline, and I've tweeted about this, but we haven't talked about it on the podcast. The most overrated storyline around this team right now is the defensive struggle in the Super Bowl. Like,
I didn't even realize that was a storyline.
It boggles my mind, and I think the Eagles have the best set of beat writers in the NFL. Like, bar none. When you go to every sporting event, I mean, like the combine, the draft, all that, you see that they're, you know, we're like 15 deep, all extremely good at our job. But it just boggles my mind how many like times that question has been asked to the coaches and the players about why they struggled in the Super Bowl. Because to me, it's like, first of all, they're going against the best quarterback of all time. 2, they had the game-winning strip sack. 3, they allowed 20 total points in the first 2 games, including 7 in the championship game. And someone tweeted me this, and so I'm just going to take it as fact, since everyone tweets me is true. Like, the Patriots didn't cross like the 40-yard line or something like that the whole for the last like 11 minutes or something like that.
Wow.
So
and also it was their 19th game they were playing that season. So
right, and I mean, you know, like, it's Tom Brady and the Patriots in the Super Bowl. Like, I think at that point you just hope the best.
Also, they won.
and they won, exactly. So to me, and you know, now that I'm talking about this, maybe I'll write this and we can do a whole podcast on it. But I think there's a strong argument to be made the Eagles can go into next season claiming they have the best defense in the entire NFL, because they have basically the same roster outside of nickel corner. In some ways. I mean, every roster changes a little, but they have all the main guys again.
And they added Michael Bennett.
Exactly. And to me, like, I put a ton of emphasis on what teams do when games matter, and the Eagles' defense dominated in games they had to win last year overall, basically. I mean, if I remember, they weren't that great in the Giants game late in the season, but, they dominated the Cowboys in prime time. They dominated in the playoffs. That Raiders game that they won in prime time, they were really good. And they got the job done in the Super Bowl. So I think the defense, you can make an argument, is the best in the NFL heading next season. And I literally never want to hear again about the defensive struggles in the Super Bowl. Like, if they come out in the first weeks of the season and they struggle, it will have zero to do with what happened in the Super Bowl. Like, that was not the blueprint of how to beat the Eagles. Not every team has Tom Brady. Not every team has Rob Gronkowski. Like, that was not a blueprint. Like, we will see into next season how the Eagles defense does. I think they'll be very good, but the Super Bowl, to me, like, has nothing to do with it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, on paper, that they have, if not the most talented, then one of the top 2 or 3 most talented defenses in the NFL.
Easily.
So
Easily.
If they struggle, has nothing to do with what happened in the Super Bowl.
All right. Do you have an overrated storyline? This is off the cuff. If not, it's all good. You can think of one to do it next time. But do you have an overrated storyline heading into?
No, I don't think I do off the top of my head, and I'll have to think about that.
All right, you'll have to tweet it.
I have like a question for you that'll be off the cuff though.
All right, let's hear it.
Just throw it out. So who do you think will be this year's Nelson Aguilar? A guy who not necessarily, I mean, you could say labeled a bust or struggled for a year or two, and then this year, or at least a candidate to become that. Because I have a guy in mind, but I don't know if he'll necessarily become it. But I have a guy. I was just curious who you would say.
All right. Well, I don't want to take yours, but so I think the obvious one is Derek Barnett, but it's hard for defensive ends to really stand out in training camp practices. So you're mostly talking about a guy that's going to be a skill position player, because those are the guys that, like, are able to shine the best in training camp. So mine would be Donnell Pumphrey.
That was who I was going to say.
God, I knew it was going to. Yeah.
Well, I mean, he's the obvious one, because if you just factor in, like, everybody labeled Nelson Aguilar a bust, everybody kind of already moved on from him. Nobody was talking about him anymore. Like, I don't necessarily think Donnell's going to have that huge of an impact this year, but like we probably were saying that about Nelson Aguilar at this time a year or two ago. So it just makes a lot of sense that he could be like a surprise guy.
Right. My other guy, I don't know if this doesn't qualify for your list, but I think a guy that in 3 weeks is going to be viewed a lot differently than he is now is Nate Sudfeld. I think he's going to play really well in preseason. He's going to play really well in the training camp. And I think that, like, I don't think people are going to be saying trade Foles because of it, because he's Super Bowl MVP, but I think that people will be talking like, wow, the Eagles could really get something for Sudfeld if they want.
I was going to say, so do you think if, like, he comes out and has like 3 good preseason games and a quarterback gets injured, like, do you think he's a guy that a team would target for someone who's not like as pricey as Nick Foles would be for them? Like, do you think he could build his value up that much?
So, yeah, I think the teams are going to want Nate Sudfeld. I mean, a team tried to sign him last year and the Eagles kept him, but like, again, my value of, like, trade assets is always very different than everyone else's. Like, last year I said I wouldn't trade Jordan Matthews unless it was a top 15 pick in the draft. And like, so I mean, whatever, right?
There,
like,
yeah.
So, but when I look at Sudfeld, I'm thinking like, okay, he plays the most important position in all of sports. He's a developmental guy. He's been here for a year. He's very close with Wentz.
6'6".
Yeah, he has all the physical tools. You might lose Foles at the end of the year, but I think Sudfeld is a guy that, like, ideally would be your backup for Wentz's entire career. Now, he'll become a free agent at one point. Who knows what would happen. I think he would probably want to stay, but I'm sure he also wants to play too. But, like, if a team calls me, and even if I know Wentz is playing week 1, like, it's going to take a lot to get Sudfeld, because if you're in win now mode, and if Wentz goes down, all of a sudden Foles is your starter, and then backup's a huge position. So, like, Sudfeld is, like, kind of like shady, a really important player on this roster, because Wentz looked healthy, all that, blah blah blah. Coming off a torn ACL, players tear their ACLs again. That's just how it goes sometimes. So, like, all right, I have a trade asset in my mind that I would trade Sudfeld for, and you try to guess what it is. Like, make me an offer, and I'll tell you if I would take it.
So if I'm another team offering
You're another team that wants a quarterback.
Oh man, and are we going off it like are we pretend like this right now, or this is like after he had?
No, like after week. This is like after the second preseason game. He's played 6 quarters. He's looked amazing. That type of thing.
Okay. 4th round pick?
Nope.
You would go higher than that?
Mine was 2nd.
Wow. Nobody would do that, right?
Right. Nobody would, but
I see what you're saying. Like that's what it's kind of like how they were asking for 2 firsts for Nick Foles kind of thing.
Right. Like the value of Sudfeld to this roster is worth more to me than like a third, fourth round pick. Like I get that value wise, I could see how people would laugh at that because he's your third string quarterback. But I just think when you look at the circumstances, it's a little different.
Then what about on the flip side? If he comes out and he looks like pretty bad for 2 preseason games, what do you think the future holds for him here?
Well, I don't think they would cut him because I do think they want to carry 3 quarterbacks because of the reasons I just mentioned. But like if Joe Callahan really outplays him, I just don't think they'd cut him. But maybe they keep Callahan on the practice
It's just
squad.
interesting to me that there's like such extremes with him, you know?
Right. No, I agree. I mean, and that's the thing too. Like the Eagles value the quarterback position so much, and rightfully so. Where like, I mean, when I first started covering the team, like probably couldn't even tell you now. At the time I could, but now I probably can even tell you the third string quarterback was because it was like it didn't really matter. Like you had your starter and your backup, and that was it. But I think the Eagles showed like by investing so much in the quarterback position, both in coaches and hiring former quarterbacks as your coaches, that type of thing. Like to me, the third quarterback position is so important because you're always using that spot to develop, and you're always using that spot as your potential backup if your starter goes down. So. And I'm not trading quarterbacks lightly. So I just don't think Sudfeld would have to really suck, basically, is what I'm saying, for me to cut him.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. I'm just curious. I'm just curious to see like how it plays out if he just comes out and looks bad. I don't think he's going to.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, it is different when you're playing against other teams than your own guys.
Well, the good news is I will have his stats for you every day on NJ.com. So we will know whether he is.
And we can overreact after practice 1.
Oh, that's all we do. I mean, last year we had Hot Take Tuesday. We'll have to maybe re-up that for the.
I like that.
Hot Take Tuesday. We'll have to maybe re-up that for the training camp. So, all right. So we went over the storylines. Training camp, as I said, July 19th. So we're a week away. Probably not gonna have a pod until then, but let's do one the first day to talk about what we see, how Wentz looks, and all that. So we will have a podcast for you next Thursday.
Send us questions.
Yeah, send us questions. Leave a review. Now that look, you guys didn't leave reviews in the offseason. I understand. We probably did a bad job of getting podcasts up regularly, but now it's going to be regular season. So everybody get back to doing leaving those reviews. Apple Podcast app, you can do it in there. We're on Spreaker, Google Play, YouTube, all that stuff. So go subscribe, leave a review. And Zach, I will talk to you before next Thursday, but I'll talk to you on the podcast next week at the start of training camp.
All right, I'm pumped.